Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you on the XM66F. This is a premium tier 8 American turreted tank destroyer, and it's available inside the large loot boxes this year. But I guess, unlike the tier 9 vehicles, unlike the Type 63 with the new accuracy mechanics, no one's really paying attention to this one, and today I'm going to let you know why you really should pay attention to it. So before we get stuck in the gameplay, I'm going to compare the XM66F to the Tech Tree T28 prototype, the Vipera, and the Turtle. So immediately we notice this vehicle doesn't have nearly as good damage per minute as the Omega overpowered Turtle, but it's still great. 2,526, once you get a gun rammer and vents on that, starts to become really scary. This vehicle has a 120mm main armament, which will give it some advantage compared to the Turtle's 108 at overmatching 35mm plates, but it's still not going to overmatch many plates in World of Tanks because it's not a 121mm. The penetration on this tank is 232 on its standard rounds. Not bad, does better than the Vipera, slightly worse than the recently buffed Turtle, significantly worse than the T28 prototype. And if you load gold on this vehicle, you have 276mm of penetration, which means that it has just a little bit more than the Turtle, but not nearly as good as the 297 that you would be used to on the T28 prototype. Now, it's hard to compare a tank without an autoloader to one such as the Vipera, but you'll notice once you start to get good equipment on this vehicle, and even if you whack a premium consumable on this tank, you can get the reload of this tank down to 7.5 seconds, which is only 1.5 seconds more than the Vipera, and that's with standard equipment. That is some pretty scary damage per minute, considering that the XM never has to actually have that big magazine reload like the Vipera. Passing mention should be made to the vehicle's slight advantage when it comes to shell velocity, which will definitely help you at decent distances. So let's take a look at the gun handling of this vehicle. 2 seconds aim time, very nice, the best for a 120mm caliber gun. 0.38 accuracy, not nearly as good as the Turtle, but way better than the Vipera. And this vehicle has the same gun handling as the Turtle when moving and turning its semi-traversable turret. Now, the turret on this vehicle has 30 degrees gun arc, so that's only 10 degrees to the left and right more than the Turtle. And while that's still 50% better than the Turtle, there's not too much difference between having a turret on this tank and not on the British Tier 8. This incredibly limited traverse arc means that it doesn't really even feel like it's a turreted tank. It just feels like a wide gun arc on a TD, especially when we compare it to the Vipera that can go 45 degrees to the left and the right, and the T28 prototype, which can go 143 degrees to the left and to the right. That is a true turreted tank. So one of the great things about the XM66F, however, is the top speed. 35 forward leaves all of the other vehicles in this comparison in the dust, and 15 reverse speed makes it very flexible on a ridgeline. To add to this, the vehicle has an impressive power-to-weight ratio of 15, which means it scales well with a turbo, but it does have poor ground resistances compared to all of the other tanks here. That means that on soft terrain, they all roughly have the same top speed. However, Wargaming have given it 26 degrees a second tank traverse, which means that it will turn quicker even with these poor ground resistances on all terrain apart from soft compared to the Turtle. Accordingly, that makes the XM66F not quite have the firepower of perhaps the Turtle, but better than the Vipera and the T28, apart from with regards to penetration on the T28. It has pretty darn good gun handling, and it has much better mobility than these other super heavy tank destroyers. So let's take a look to see how good its armor is. Well, this is where it's really disappointing with regards to the hull of this tank. 95 on the front and 50 on the side. All of these other tanks have over 200mm of frontal hull armor. This means that the XM absolutely sucks with regards to its hull protection. And even with 232mm of penetration, you can see the whole of the front of this hull is super easy to pen. And if you over-angle the vehicle, even the back becomes an easy pen. Now, the side of the turret is not too bad against standard rounds, but the vehicle does have weak points on top that unless you are using your 10 degrees of gun depression, it is quite hard to be able to hide. Now, with regards to the turret front, if you're not using any of your gun depression, there is a slight weak point to the left, but only for decent penetration rounds, and most of your opponents are going to have to load gold to be able to hit it. And apart from that, I'll pretty much sit in front of anything with this turret and just hope that they miss the shot. As long as, of course, I can manage to be penetrating my opponents. This vehicle's really simple with regards to its armor. You want to only be taking hits when you're sitting hull down, and this frontal hull really sucks for when you're coming around a corner, as you have to expose it, and this vehicle definitely isn't the best of side scrapers, as you're always going to expose the side of this veer point and also that upper hull. But I would definitely recommend side scraping in this tank still, instead of actually just coming around a corner like this, because that is a disaster. To add to this, the vehicle has a reasonable amount of hit points, 1,300, not as good as the Turtle, but the same as the Vipera and better than the T28 prototype. And nicely, this vehicle gets 380 meters view range, means that you won't need coated optics on this tank unless you have a terrible crew. So the crew on this vehicle is identical to that on a T110E4 or a T110E3, so if you have a crew on either of those two vehicles, they're going to work perfectly on the XM66F. The only crew member which has high pressure is the commander, as they're also the radio operator on this vehicle, and they will need to have skills like brothers-in-arms, recon, situational awareness, repairs, and concealment before I would even consider this vehicle to be competitive. On my gunner, I would really like to focus on snapshot to improve the traverse dispersion when you're turning the turret, Deadeye so that you can be able to get more crits in against your opponents, and even designated target, in addition to the 3 mandatory skills, which is brothers in arms, repairs, and concealment on this vehicle. For your driver, off-road driving can help, in addition to clutch braking to be able to get your hull on your opponent's smooth ride, would be a latter focus after the priorities of brothers in arms, repairs, and concealment on every single one of these crews. Luckily, as 2 loaders, just have one that has safe stowage, one that has adrenaline rush, and intuition is more optional on this vehicle, as it has AP and APCR, and you're going to be either firing the cheaper rounds or the more expensive rounds, depending on whether you can go through your opponents. So not too bad of a crew on this vehicle. Equipment-wise, I have 2 builds on this tank. One is gun rammer, vents, turbo. This is for maps where you want to be able to have the mobility to go and find a ridgeline and farm from that position. And then when I'm playing on city maps or maps where it's easy to be able to get into position and I don't have to do so quickly, and considering this vehicle goes at 35, there are quite a few maps like that in the game, I'm going to drop the turbo and use a durability device instead. For field mods on this tank, firstly, you must take reinforced suspension, otherwise just uninstall the game. Next, improve the accuracy of this vehicle, followed up with some view range. And personally for me, I'm going to take the survivability slot so I can put my durability in there, along with either gun rammer or vent in the firepower slot, depending on your preference. And that's it. Super simple for the XM66F. Let's take this American beast out onto the battlefield. All right, so firstly, we're rolling out our mines, and we are in a nice matchup for this tank. I'm going to take a turbo because I want to be a little bit cheeky and try and challenge for the hill. But in this kind of a scenario, you could also take the durability. One of the crazy things about this vehicle is how much it just feels as if it's a heavy tank. A heavy tank with regards to everything apart from the hull armor. Vehicles like the Turtle and vehicles like the Vipera and the T28 prototype, they truly feel like they're super heavy tank destroyers. This one kind of has the same turret as those vehicles, it just only lacks the hull armor. But of course, as you all know, tanks like the Super Conqueror, for example, they do really well even though they've got tragic hull armor. Now, the XM66F is a little bit different because I'd say the Super Conqueror's upper hull is still workable and this thing's upper hull definitely isn't. But considering how fat the turret is, as long as you're able to deal with your opponent's turrets and you're not exposing too much of your hull, this thing is an absolute monster. Just don't know where that shell went. That one was an absolute little bit of a whiff. So the BZ176 is making their way up onto the hill. I'm trying to turn my armor towards them. They absolutely crunch me there. And I'm thinking, shall I go up and try and help the VK that's up on top of the hill now? Nah, you know what? I'll just go for the OI, just take the free damage in that situation. And you know what? If the BZ decides to go after the VK, well, maybe I can start to help them out. So unfortunately, the Lurva probably doesn't see me there, bumps into me, nothing malicious there. Probably just didn't have eyes on their side, completely understandable. And I'm just worried. I ping the map for the BZ176, and I see that they appear up there. I see that they've managed to destroy the VK. I'm going to go after this SU-152, and the last thing that you really want to have is a BZ-176 above you. Unfortunately, my shell velocity's half decent on this tank, but not quite enough to react quick enough for the T-25-2. And I noticed the Lurva and the Patriot are taking the hill. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, let's go. I'm going to expose the side of my turret to the SU-152. And the BZ-176 is going to come around the corner, shoot the Lurva for 800, but that's the last shot they are going to be getting in this game. They're ammo racked, they're tracked, they're locked in place, they aren't reloading again. They're going to have about a 40-second reload time, and that is one of the easiest kills of BZ-176 you're ever going to get. So apart from that big old meaty shot that I took in the hull, decent enough round so far, and getting this tank into this position in this kind of a matchup, this just feels like cheating. This is 2,500 base damage per minute, and really, this gun, it kind of feels like it's more of a really, it's like a heavy tank plus 10%, or even a heavy tank plus 15%. And in this kind of a scenario, I'm like a renegade that hits for an extra 40, but has like 10% better damage per minute anyway. So I've kind of got like the same rate of fire as a Renegade, but I'm just hitting for 400 rather than 360. This thing in these kind of situations, it's absolutely brutal. And to have that semi-traversable turret just allows you to be so flexible as you're coming around corners. Just be careful, because as you can see, as soon as you expose that hull armor, it is truly atrocious. So this thing was just so bizarre for me, because I looked at it in the loot crates and I thought, it doesn't really look that impressive. But the thing that I really underestimated on this vehicle is just how fast it can be. Driving along at 40 kilometers an hour with a turbo, while also still having, should we say, at least tier 9 medium tank gun, while having a very decent turret, this thing just feels as if it's the entire package. Of course, if you can manage to hide that lower plate. But just look at what we're doing here. We are 3.5 minutes into this game. We've destroyed a third of the enemy team, and we're up to 6,000 combined. And unfortunately, we are not going to find the Basoto, I don't believe, for the Top Gun. Nah, it's not going to happen. 4 minutes in, 6,000 combined, 5 frags, including on taking out the most overpowered vehicle, the BZ-176. This thing, in the right scenario, is great at pressure, and it absolutely claps. All right, so round 2. Now we're going to be rolling out in an all tier 8 matchup, so no more juicy tier 6s to farm, right? And we're playing on Oyster Bay, the new map, which is as long as it can get. So that's where this tank and its 40 kilometers an hour top speed limit with a turbo is very useful. You can kind of play it as if it's a slower medium, or I guess a reasonably speedy heavy, and that is crazy for a vehicle that has such a good turret. There aren't really tank destroyers that blur the lines between medium, tank destroyer, or heavy this much. The other ones are like the Turtle, which until recently was pretty irrelevant. Now, this tank's able to go 5 kilometers an hour faster than that, actually 10 kilometers an hour faster than that when we consider it, and all it really has to do is sacrifice the hull armor and a little bit of the DPM, but for that it gains a huge amount of alpha damage. Going from 330 up to 400 is absolutely no slouch. This thing kind of feels like it's a T125 from that regard, just without the hull armor, and sure, with about 1,000 less hit points as well, which definitely isn't going to help. And while this gun is decent, and you can improve it with the field mod that improves the accuracy, you can improve it with vents to be able to improve the accuracy by an extra 3%, it's definitely not the best of snipers. But I did find that this tank, in this kind of an environment, aka sitting on a ridgeline and just absolutely chonking whatever's in front of it, I don't really feel that there are many better tank destroyers in the game for this and for this kind of play. It's this wonderful hybrid of speed with effective turret armor and a gun that just absolutely smashes through its opponents in quite rapid time. The gun rammer and the vents really scale very well on this vehicle, and I would recommend them in all builds on this tank. Don't really feel like you need a rotation device on this vehicle. You could do, considering that the turret traverse speed is quite poor. It's actually got a base turret traverse of 16 degrees a second, which isn't great. But yeah, this is where, put in an awkward scenario, right? Have to push a T-44. Centurion decides to lose 581 hit points. A lot of fun gamers about at the moment. But I know that I've got such a crazy rate of fire compared to this T-44. So as long as I keep my gun up in his, maybe I can be able to catch the ricochet. And that is all she wrote for that cheeky tier 8 medium. But unfortunately, this vehicle, it's not very intelligent within that regard. I had to expose my backside to all of those vehicles up on the ridge. So I was worried in that scenario. I was really worried that they were going to be able to catch me out. But what was I going to do? Just sit there and allow them to more tanks to come into the position to be able to stop me from making the push? Unfortunately, this vehicle just, it has to try and make that push. It has to take that risk. If it doesn't take that risk, what is it going to do? Just sit there and your opponents are just going to only cement the angles that they have on it. So you have to be willing to take chances in this vehicle. You have to be willing to make the breakthrough, because your hull armor isn't going to work. And obviously from the side and the rear, man, this thing is an absolute tubber within that regard. It kind of does feel as if Wargaming have tried to make a T110E4 at tier 8. It's just this vehicle has far more damage per minute than the T110E4. And so we end up with a vehicle that has got much more damage per minute at a tier where everyone's got much less hit points. And that is a truly terrifying thing. And the fact that this thing is as fast as a T124 is also pretty scary. Okay, so the XM66F comes around the corner. I'm going to put a round into the Type 63. The Type 63 luckily doesn't high roll against me. That activates my adrenaline rush, so maybe I'm going to get one shot in. And now we just got to pray that this XM sucks, but unfortunately they don't. Luckily for me, my team go on to win this one. We managed to pick up 4,600 combined in sub 5 minutes with 4 kills. Not bad farming. So now we're going to be rolling out on Overlord, and we're in a full tier 8 matchup. I want to highlight that. I want to highlight that this vehicle, it doesn't perform nearly as well against tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, because your penetration of 232 is not going to be enough to be able to challenge a lot of their positions. And you're going to have to load a lot of gold, 276. That's not bad penetration to be able to start to contest their armor. This vehicle really is the kind of tank that is matchmaking dependent, at least when it wants to have its hero games. However, I would say that all of the tank destroyers that this vehicle kind of competes with, aka the Vipera, aka the Turtle, those are all matchmaking dependent kind of tanks as well. Although I would say that this one is actually probably better than those inside a bad matchup, because it doesn't really rely on its hull armor, because its hull armor is awful. What this thing has is just the flexibility and the firepower compared to those tanks. And especially the speed, which can allow it to relocate. And so I would probably say that this vehicle is the more consistent one. And that is pretty alarming. It should be alarming for all of you when I say that this thing is the more consistent one. I see that the Type 63 is ammo-racked, so I don't really need to worry about him. This vehicle's armor is so crazy. Well, this vehicle's rate of fire is so crazy that I could actually shoot the KB5 to try and get the extra damage on him, and then save that Type 63 like some greedy spider that has it caught up in its web for later. So, gosh, 3 minutes into this game, and I didn't really do much for the early part of the battle. And now we're just up to 3,300 damage and 400 assistance. This thing's damage per minute is pretty crazy. And at least with the way that the matchmaking has been for me, and let's be honest, there are a lot of casual players back playing World of Tanks around about this time of year. Yeah, this thing is just absolutely monstrous. Unfortunately, the XM66F there just doesn't really have very good armor if it's not using any of its gun depression. We brought on into the back of the Lerva. Look for the XM66F on my left. Not sure I'm going to be able to find it. Going to go work down towards the ridgeline and use this vehicle's excellent 10 degrees of gun depression, come in behind the Type 63 and find the shot into the 703, and then do a glorious swan dive roll. Hooray! Finishing it off there with the E75 also wanting to join in. And just like that, in this kind of 4-minute game, we've gone and done 4,800 combined. This thing farms, and it farms quickly. And unlike the other TDs, you're fast enough to be able to get those final rewards. However, it isn't all good news for this tank. When you aren't in those hold down positions, things get a little bit ugly. And so what you're going to find as a player, that a lot of how well you will do in the XM66F will be down to how well you know the maps and how many positions you can find to be able to abuse, like where I'm going here. Now, if there was artillery, I really wouldn't want to go here. The top of this tank is not good, and your opponents are going to be able to do some horrible things to it. And also, be very careful going into this position if there's knowledgeable players who manage to make their way up into the alcove that you see up here, as they're going to be able to shoot down on you. However, this position, pretty nice for being able to just hold back the T28. Now the T28 with the same kind of gun as me, it puts a gold round through my turret, the second round bounces off, and this Emil, they are in the wrong neck of the woods. Doesn't look like they were looking at their minimap, and it's the last thing they're ever going to do, as the XM66F is a voracious farmer in a position like this. And that is the whole of a tier 8 heavy tank carved up in record time. Fully processed and prepared for delivery, right? Now we're going to have a go at this T28. I'm going to load gold rounds here to see if we can be able to go through the hull armor of the T28 and actually have an opportunity to hit the lower plate. And if I can't, then I can hopefully aim up in. In this kind of a situation, that's meant to be one of like the most brutal frontal TDs right at tier 8. And I feel like I am the new turreted tank that can be able to use more positions and be more flexible in that scenario. You'll notice for my build here that I'm using gun rammer, durability, and turbo. And the reason for that is I didn't have the second field mod. This isn't my preferred build on this vehicle. This is actually one of the first games that I had in this tank, and so I was just learning how to play this vehicle. And in this replay specifically, I'm going to be able to accelerate your learning and let you know some of the pitfalls about it. The reason why I'm using the durability and not the vents here, as I said, is because I don't have the second field mod. And the second field mod massively improves your suspension durability. I think it's 30%. And so accordingly, I don't want to be double tracked in this tank because I don't have a fully traversable turret. So if you want to min-max this vehicle, it's only going to be for a few games, but I would recommend using the durability to start with and then adding the turbo later on, or just dropping the vents for this kind of a build to start off with. But once you've managed to get that second field mod and your tracks are more healthy, you can take more risks by dropping the durability device and just using a turbo and getting the vents on it. And the vents do help because, as you can see, we're not reaching our optimal view range, which of course is improved by the field mod that we have later on. But I think the vents are just absolutely awesome on this vehicle. Not only are they improving your aim time a little bit, your accuracy by 3%, but you're also starting to get your damage per minute up into that really scary level. So I guess the CC67 got bored and decided that they wanted to go and try and hunt the TS5. Well, it looks like it's going to be one of the last things they're going to be hunting, as we managed to full roast that CC67 for nearly 1,000 damage. And so I have to admit, in this situation, I was thinking, well, you know, I got hit by 1 gold round. I got 1,000 hit points left. Looks like a farm. Let's go farm. Let's go and farm our opponents, right? And so we're going to come around the corner. We're not even going to get penned by the Tiger 2. I know I've got the rate of fire advantage against them, so I'm just hoping that we're going to be able to get a shot into the lower plate, and we actually don't. I guess we aim low there and we ricochet, and suddenly everything starts just going wrong. We get hit by the M3Y because we have poor hull armor. We get hit by the CC67 because we have poor hull armor, although to be fair, that was a 300mm heat round, which is probably going to pen most. And the blooming M3Y comes around the corner again and puts another shot into us, and we're quite stout, so we're unable to see over the CC67. And suddenly, we have gone from 1,000 hit points and looking like we were going to absolutely dominate this game, and we were on 3,200 combined, to now being on 3,600 combined. I'll be at 4K now. And suddenly this game is looking neck and neck. And this is what I really want to highlight to all of you. That this vehicle, it is not nearly as good as so many other tier 8 tank destroyers in these brawling situations. If I was in the Vipera, I would be surprised if I lost all these hit points. If I was in the Turtle, I'd be surprised if I lost all these hit points. And the lack of the turret means, and the poor traverse means, I can't quite get the gun on the M3Y to be able to finish them off. So I want to highlight a few things in this one. This will pitfalls to avoid and will help you become a better XM66F player quicker. Number 1, watch out for that turret traverse. Number 2, get hull down. Number 3, get hull down. Number 4, you get what I'm trying to say. Don't expose your hull. If you do have to, try and side scrape, but be warned, if your opponents have multiple angles on you, it's going to be ugly. And so for every game that you managed to get into, for the first 3 replays that I showed you, where you get into a hold down position, you get to absolutely farm, you're going to have one game where you're playing against tier 9s and tier 10s, and whether you do well or not, I guess, comes down to you as a player and how bad your opponents are. And then you're going to have these games where you don't have opportunities to go hold down, you have to expose your hull, and things get ugly. And while it's early days yet, in the first 2 days of the release of the XM66F, it has been played 63,000 times, and it has the 4th best win ratio of any tier 8 tank destroyer. However, I would like to highlight that it looks like it's the better players who are playing this vehicle so far, as it is newer, and its win rate difference is actually not that impressive. It's actually one of the lower ones with regards to its win rate difference. However, for me personally, this vehicle was actually giving me the best results of any of the new tier 8 and tier 9 vehicles inside the loot boxes. I think it's an absolute beast. It feels like it's a heavy tank, albeit with bad hull armor, that just has to sacrifice a fully traversable turret, which isn't really even that big of a deal. I think if you set this vehicle up correctly, it's an absolute monster and a complete underrated gem inside the loot boxes. However, I want to highlight that the gameplay doesn't feel as if it's anything new. It doesn't feel as if it's anything exceptional. You frankly just feel that you're playing another tank with another good turret, with a semi-traversable turret that does well when it gets to farm tanks that it can penetrate. It doesn't have the best alpha, it doesn't have the best damage per minute, it doesn't have the best speed, doesn't have an autoloader, doesn't have any new mechanics. It's just another tier 8 premium tank destroyer, albeit it does do very well with regards to that turret. And I think it's the speed that makes the difference on this tank. It's this mobility. It's the fact it can go 35 when the Viper is at 30, the Turtle's at 25, and the T-28 prototype's at 28. To have such a good turret combined with this speed to actually access those hold down positions is what makes this thing intimidating. And while it's definitely not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and I don't really see it being that popular in a few months after everybody's kind of got bored of it from playing it inside the loot boxes, this is still arguably one of the better tanks that has come out this year. And if you're an aggressive player, you know your maps, and you know how to aim, there is nothing stopping you from dominating in the XM66F. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this tank review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Monday, I am going to be going live all day on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby with brand new drops, so you can get tokens to get a variety of awesome things, like incredible styles, including the one that turns the FV4005 into a steam engine if you missed that from last year's large boxes. Or you can even get yourself a tier 7 premium tank, the Eagle, from collecting tokens every Monday and every Friday over the month of December. So really looking forward to seeing you all live right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby so that Uncle Scrubby Baby can deliver you your tokens and give you your Christmas treats. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.